Power can be awesome, and power can be problematic. Naaman, the commander of the army of the Arameans, and the 70 that went out at Jesus' command, both experience power. In Naaman's case, he has a disability. Yet he overcomes it with his talent and his gifts because he's one who has what they call leprosy. Scholars tend to think that the leprosy described in Scripture was very heavy dandruff, but something that was really unsightly and something that nobody liked. But Naaman has this and does an excellent job for the king, and there finds a way to heal him. And this is where Naaman and power kind of intersect. Naaman eventually gets to Elisha, the prophet, and goes to him with his full force and expects the prophet to come out and treat Naaman as the powerful man he is and do all kinds of things to make him feel better about being healed. Ones that honor his stature. And so when he receives the simple command to go wash 7 times in the Jordan River, and Elisha doesn't even bother to come out and say hello, Naaman is really upset. His sense of self, well, in the Middle Ages, the term Occam's razor has come into vogue, and basically the simplest thing might just be the best. And it's interesting how the simpler folks who travel with Naaman, the ones who serve him basically say, oh, wake up. If he asked you to do something really hard, you would have done it. Because, you know, you've always done hard things in your life to prove to people so much. And it would just fit into your sense of stature. They don't say that out loud, but that's implied. And he finally realizes, well, maybe I ought to do the simpler things. Does, and he's healed. So power is a tricky thing. Jesus sends 70 out. Now, have you ever wondered who might have been amongst the 70? Well, if you think about it, Luke gives us an insight. At the beginning of the Acts of the Apostles, the continuation, if you will, of the Gospel according to Luke, Peter realizes and says to the other 10, you know, we had 12 when Jesus was here. Judas is no longer with us. We better get back to the number 12. And so they establish a criteria for how they're going to go about electing somebody to fill that 12th spot. And the criteria is basically somebody who has been with us since the beginning at the baptism of Jesus. So there were clearly others who were following. They were not members of the inner circle, but they were learning and doing things. And so there is Joseph, also named Barsabbas, also known as Justus. And then there is Matthias. And they then cast lots to guide them into who God would have chosen to be the one who replaces Judas. And that becomes Matthias. Now, I've been wondering about Joseph, also known as Barsabbas or Justus. I'm going to simply call him JBJ, because it's a whole lot easier. JBJ and Matthias. And I have to wonder, were they part of the 70? And I would like to think they were, because they were there from the beginning. It would seem in keeping that as the apostles picked their criteria, it would certainly have included something like that. And I have to wonder, did JBJ and Matthias, were they paired together? Did they go out and work well together? Or were they out kind of like two acrimonious brothers, backbiting all the way? I have a feeling they had to have worked well together for them to have been able to voice what Jesus asked them to voice, for them to have cast out demons in his name. I mean, to be that fully present to God. But perhaps in the time that came after that, and why they were picked, either because they were the two most holy of the group there, or did they start representing divergent viewpoints? We all know the church is full of divergent viewpoints. It's even there in the Bible about should you be circumcised or not if you're a Gentile? What should you be eating or not? Do you need to go through the Jewish rites before you become allowed to be fully part of the way, to be a Christian? So you can see that human aspect of ourselves hanging on to a position and then trying to exert power from a position is, again, a problematic part of who we are as a people. We do this. And we can create the silliest reasons for not wanting to talk to somebody else. I mean, you look at the Jews and the Samaritans. It's the same thing. It's where do you worship God? But boy, did that really divide them. So, Jesus is the reconciler. Jesus is the one that points us to where we can go. Prophets attempt to do that, but Jesus is the one who doesn't. But we're also given the opportunity, guess what? To ignore Jesus. And I'm pretty sure in a few minutes when we get down on our knees and we offer the prayer of confession, we might remember once or twice in the last one of a little while that, yeah, the opportunity to ignore Jesus came and, hey, I took it. And I'm glad that you welcomed me back. So I'm not trying to basically say we're talking about them. We're talking about us. About how easy it is for us to take a position and then exert it for some kind of means. I mean, even in the Gospel of John, there's an underlying theme there of the early church trying to organize itself. Remember, the Gospel of John is 20 years after the Gospels of Matthew and Luke. And so now they're trying to figure out how to be who they are. And there's that group that wants to just go out with their hands raised up in exuberant praise, which is great, but they're not getting any work done. And then there's the other group that's in there that's basically saying, we better get some rules, or we're not going to get any work done. They're getting so many rules. They're falling the trap of not getting any work done. And again, the book really speaks to these groups finding some sense of who Jesus is. But you can see how this is a continual theme that we're always working with. So, did Matthias and Jay, did they represent different factions? I don't know, but it enters an interesting thought, because in our own society today, in the way we are governed, and blessed be that we are governed in a democracy where we have voice. But it's really interesting watching how those voices have become voices that are much more polarizing than unifying. And this is not new. This has been going on ever since we were conceived as a republic without a king, giving ourselves the opportunity to have voice, where we try our best not to allow an aristocracy to say, this is what you need, and go do it. But you're in a place where what your own accomplishments are can bring you to those moments of power. And then, of course, the choice of how to exercise that power. So you can see how Naaman could actually be an example of somebody who overcame a disability and exercised great power. But at the same time, how that power could be problematic for him. In the earliest days of our republic, as they were crafting the Constitution of the United States, there were powerful forces at work, and one of those had to do with the issue of slavery. And the way they tap danced around it was, there'll be some states that'll have slaves, and some states that won't. And during the first 40 or 50 years of our country's existence, those who were charged with exercising power kept finding ways to keep a balance so that nothing could erupt and become problematic. But then, as we know, over 153 years ago, the country fell into a civil war because this question had to be dealt with. Now, the originating issues had more to do with who gets to decide what, who gets to explore power and exercise power. You can see how this theme falls through all of who we are. And so I bring this to your attention because 150 years ago, there was the battle in Gettysburg, where Lee invaded the North with his army and was met by another army, the Army of the Potomac, and they clashed. Now, the reason I bring this to your attention is this was the clash over how we are going to be who we are. Are we going to be a union that tries hard to listen to one another and exercise power responsibly? Remember, we are the ones who pray for government, good government. Or are we also going to allow certain things to happen where all are not treated equally? And I want to bring this, and I'm trying to raise this to a point where I can read something to you that especially 150 years since those who came and fought there, needs to never be forgotten. And I believe the words of Abraham Lincoln when he spoke at Gettysburg when they were dedicating the Soldiers' Cemetery a few months later are words we should never, ever forget because of what it means to us as a people who are granted the privilege of freedom and the responsibility of power. Abraham Lincoln said, 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as its final resting place for those who here gave their lives that the nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men living and dead who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That here we highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. There's a majesty in the way Lincoln exercised power in these words that embraced all who fought and died the last full measure of their devotion. We can offer no less in how we responsibly call upon God to guide us in how we use our gifts in that same way, so that all will find the love we have found. All these words I offer in the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Amen.